The wind came first, a high, thin scream over the high plains. It was a sound that belonged to the ghosts of the Wind River Mountains, a sound that promised an early and hard winter. The snow followed, not in gentle flakes, but in sharp, stinging pellets that blurred the line between the gray sky and the iron-hard ground. Wyoming Territory in the 1880s was not a place for the weak, and the mountains, silhouettes of deep purple and black in the distance, seemed to watch the land with a cold, ancient indifference beneath the rotting skeleton of a wagon left to ruin on an abandoned mining trail. A woman shivered. Her name, for now, was Clara. She was pressed so far into the frozen mud and dead grass that she might have been mistaken for a pile of discarded rags. The wind found her anyway. Slicing through the thin, torn shawl she clutched over a dress that was little more than tatters. She was gaunt, the skin stretched tight over her cheekbones, painting shadows in the hollows of her face, a dark, ugly bruise, the color of spoiled plums, stained her jaw, disappearing into a hairline matted with sweat and dirt. She was barefoot. Her feet were raw, blue-black with cold and cut open from the rock. The fever was on her, a deep, internal shaking that had nothing to do with the snow. She had been running for 3 days, or perhaps 4. Time had dissolved into a haze of hunger and fear. She closed her eyes, and the world went black. Wes heard the wind, but he did not feel the cold. He was built for this country, or perhaps broken by it in a way that made him fit. He was a towering man, broad in the shoulders and long in the limb, moving with a heavy, deliberate gait. He led a mule loaded with 2 deer, the steam rising from their cooling bodies. He was headed home, to the only place that tolerated him. His face was a map of past troubles. A long, silver scar ran from the corner of his left eye down to his jaw, pulling the skin tight and giving him a permanent, grim set to his mouth. It was a knife U's work, from a life he had buried a long time ago. He saw the wagon first. He stopped, his hand resting on the stock of the rifle in his saddle scabbard. Strangers were not neighbors in this high country. They were threats. They meant questions. They meant the law. They meant bringing the world he had fled right back to his door. He circled the wagon, his eyes scanning the snow for tracks. There were none, save for the faint, staggering prints of small, bare feet, already being erased by the storm. He saw her then, the small knot of rags beneath the axle. His first thought was to keep riding. It was the smart move. He had survived this long by not interfering, by looking away. A woman, especially a woman who looked like that, bruised and discarded, meant trouble of the worst kind. She was either running from a husband or a whorehouse, and either way, men with guns would come looking. He stood there for a long minute, the snow crusting on his hat and the shoulders of his heavy coat. The mule stamped, impatient. He cursed, a low, rough sound swallowed by the wind. He could not leave her. He might be an outcast. He might have blood on his hands. But he was not the kind of man to let even a coyote die this way if he could help it. He crouched, the leather of his coat groaning. He reached under the wagon and put a hand on her shoulder. She was terrifyingly light, a collection of cold bones. He pulled her out. She was unconscious, her breathing shallow, a faint rasp in her chest. He looked at her ruined face, at the delicate wrists too small for the life she had clearly led. He sighed, the sound a plume of white steam in the air. He lifted her as easily as one of the deer, laid her over the mule, and tied her on. He turned toward the cliffs, toward the thick pines that hid his cabin, and did not look back. The cabin was modest, built with his own hands from timber he had felled himself. It was nestled deep in a cleft between 2 rising cliffs, shielded from the worst of the wind and hidden from the trail by a thick stand of lodgepole pines. It was a small, square room, with a sturdy stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a cot. Skins and pelts were stacked in one corner, and the air smelled of wood smoke, curing leather, goat, and the sharp, clean scent of pine. It was a place of solitude, a fortress built to keep the world out. He carried her inside and laid her on his own cot. For a moment, he was clumsy. The presence of a woman, of this frail, broken thing, was an invasion. He started the fire, piling logs until it roared, fighting back the biting cold that had followed them in. He fetched water from the covered bucket and set it to boil, his movements economical and sure. He had to cut the dress from her. It was frozen stiff with mud, and he saw now a little blood. He was methodical, detached, using his skinning knife with a surgeon's care, keeping the blade away from her skin. He did not let his eyes linger. He saw the bruises, a constellation of them across her ribs and back, old and new. He saw the brand, small and dark, on the back of her shoulder, a miner's pick and a letter. He felt a cold, familiar anger tighten in his gut. He washed her with a rag dipped in warm water, his touch firm and impersonal. He found a long wool shirt of his own, one that would swallow her, and worked her limp arms into it. He covered her with his heaviest bearskin. He tended to her feet, cleaning the cuts with whiskey, which made her flinch in her unconsciousness. He wrapped them in clean linen bandages. He sat in the chair across the room, watching her in the firelight. He had brought the trouble home. Clara woke with a scream caught in her throat. The warmth was the first thing she felt. It terrified her. Warmth meant a room, and a room meant men. She shot upright, the bearskin falling away, the wool shirt coarse against her skin. Her eyes were wide, frantic, darting around the small, dim cabin. She saw the low, beamed ceiling. She saw the rifles mounted on the wall. And then she saw him. He was sitting by the fire, sharpening his knife on a whetstone. The sound, shing, 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 was the only sound besides the wind. He did not look up when she moved. He simply stopped the motion of the blade. "Where am I?" Her voice was a dry croak. Wes finished one last stroke of the blade, then wiped it on his leg. He looked at her. His eyes were the color of the ice on the mountains, clear and cold. "My cabin," he said. His voice was low, rough, like stones grinding together. "You're safe from the storm." Safe. The word was a lie. No place was safe. She tried to scramble back, but her muscles screamed in protest. Pain shot up her legs from her bandaged feet. She was trapped. She was taken again. "Don't!" she rasped, pulling the wool shirt tighter. "Don't you touch me!" Wes looked at her, his scarred face unreadable in the flickering light. He had not moved from his chair, a good 10 feet away. Wasn't planning on it. He stood, and she flinched, drawing her knees to her chest. He seemed to fill the entire cabin. He was bigger than any man she had ever seen up close, a giant of raw bone and muscle. He walked to the fireplace, picked up a tin cup of broth from the hearth, and set it on the floor, halfway between them. "Drink that," he said. He did not approach her. He pushed it with his boot, a few inches closer. "You're weak." He went back to his chair and picked up the knife. But he did not sharpen it. He just sat, watching the fire. Clara stared at the cup. It could be poisoned. It could be a trick. But the smell of it, a simple, savory smell of meat and salt, made her stomach cramp with a hunger so violent it doubled her over. She waited. He did not move. He did not speak. He just sat, silent, a mountain of a man holding a deadly-looking knife, ignoring her. This silence was worse than the shouting. The men she knew were loud. They roared and grabbed and boasted. This one. He watched, slowly, her hands shaking. She reached for the cup. It was hot. She brought it to her lips and drank. The hot broth was agony in heaven. It burned a path to her empty stomach, and she cried out, a small, pained sound, but she did not stop. She drank it all, her hands trembling. He said nothing. He only fed her, 3 times a day, broth, and later, a thin stew with goat meat. He would set the bowl on the floor and walk away. He changed her bandages once, his touch rough and efficient. Never gentle, never lingering. He did not speak unless she spoke first. And then his answers were short. Yes. No. Rest. When she slept, the dreams came. She was back in the saloon, The Gold Dust. It was not a saloon so much as a long, drafty tent with a wooden floor and a bar at one end. Sawdust soaked up spilled whiskey and blood. She remembered the smell of unwashed men, cheap perfume, and desperation. She had come to the mining camp as a dancer, promised a chance to perform on a real stage. But there was no stage, only a cleared space on the floor where men crowded in, their hands grabbing, their eyes stripping her bare. She was forced to entertain, to sit on laps, to laugh at crude jokes, to pour drinks until her arms ached. She was good at it, too good. She smiled until her face hurt, and kept the men drinking. Then Rickard came. He was not a miner. He was a man who followed the camps, a man who dealt in supplies, whiskey, and women. He had paid her debts. The camp owner had charged her for her passage, her food, her first torn dress, all at an interest rate that ensured she would never be free. Rickard paid it in a single night, a flash of gold coin on the bar. He did not see it as a kindness. He saw it as a purchase. "You're mine now, Clara," he had whispered, his breath hot on her ear, his hand gripping her chin. "Every part of you." He had not been cruel. At first, he had bought her new dresses, red silk and blue velvet, and paraded her on his arm. But the entertainment continued. Only now, the money went to him, and when she refused a man he pointed to, he backhanded her, the rings on his fingers splitting her lip. The next night, he had the camp smith heat the small branding iron. He held her down himself. The escape was a blur. A fight broke out. A stove was overturned. In the smoke and chaos, she had just run. She ran out of the tent, past the mud-filled street, and into the woods. She ran until her lungs burned and her fancy saloon boots, never meant for walking, fell to pieces on the rocks. She ran until she found the wagon. She woke up sweating, the smell of smoke in her nose. The fire was low. The cabin was dark. Wes was asleep in his chair, his head leaned back against the wall. The bearskin draped over her cot now draped over him. He was too big for the chair. He looked uncomfortable, and yet completely still. She watched him. His face in sleep was younger, the scar less angry, but his hands, even in rest, were curled into loose fists. She saw a scar on his knuckles, white and old. He, too, had memories that visited him in the quiet. He was not dreaming of a saloon. He was dreaming of the flat, open plains of Texas a lifetime ago. He had been a ranch hand, good with horses, quick with a rope. He was strong, and his size was a useful thing for breaking broncs and hauling feed. Then came the foreman, a small man with a mean streak who liked to use his position to bully the hands, and more. The kitchen girls. Wes had watched him corner the new one, a girl of maybe 16, barely arrived from the east. He had cornered her in the stables. Wes had not meant to kill him. He had just meant to stop him. He had grabbed the foreman by the collar and pulled him off the girl. The man had swung at him. Wes had hit back, just once. But Wes's one hit was different than other men's. The foreman's neck had snapped. He had stood there, looking at the man on the ground, and the screaming girl, and his own massive hands. He knew, in that instant, that no one would call it defense. They would call it murder. A small, respected foreman against a giant, quiet ranch hand. He was a marked man. He took a horse and rode north. He kept riding, changing his name, working odd jobs, until he hit the mountains. Here, his size was just a tool for survival. Here, the silence was a shield. He had been hidden from the law, and from all men, for 8 years. Until now. Clara's fever broke. Her feet began to heal. The hunger faded, replaced by a restless energy. The cabin, once a refuge, now felt like a cage. And her jailer was the silent man who shared it with her. His silence unnerved her. It was a wall she could not see past. She was used to men who wanted something. Their desires were plain, written on their faces, in their grasping hands. This man, Wes, wanted nothing. He cooked, he cleaned his rifle, he mended his traps. He treated her like a piece of furniture, or perhaps a wounded goat he was nursing in the barn. She began to suspect his size was a trick, that his silence was a different kind of violence, She had to know what was behind it. She had to see him crack. "You ever get lonely up here?" she asked one evening. The wind was howling, a reminder that the world outside was still trying to kill them. He was mending a snowshoe. He did not look up. "No. Most men would be." She pulled the blanket tighter. "Most men would be glad of the company." "I ain't most men." "I can see that," she said, her voice turning sharp. "Most men don't live in a hole in the rocks like a badger. What are you hiding from?" His hand stopped. He looked up, and the coldness in his eyes made her flinch. "You should rest." "I'm tired of resting," she snapped, standing up. The wool shirt fell to her knees. "I'm tired of you watching me like I'm some sick animal. Why did you bring me here? What do you want?" "I wanted," he said, his voice dangerously low, "to not let you freeze to death." "People don't do things for nothing," she said, pacing the small space. "Not where I come from. Are you waiting for me to get stronger? Is that it? You want me to entertain you as payment for the broth?" He stood up, and the cabin shrank. He was a foot taller than her, and twice as wide. The shadow he cast swallowed her whole. He took a step toward her. Clara stood her ground, her chin high, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. She was terrified, but she was also angry. She would not be weak. He stopped, just out of reach. His face was dark. "I don't want anything from you." "Then why do you look at me?" she challenged. "I see you. When you think I'm not paying attention. What's wrong, cowboy? Afraid to take what you want?" She was trying to provoke him, to force him into a shape she recognized. The bully, the buyer, the man who takes. If he was that, she knew how to survive him. This silent, watchful man was a mystery she could not solve, and it terrified her. He looked at her for a long, hard second. His scarred face was impossible to read. Then, he turned his back on her. He grabbed his heavy coat from the peg. "Where are you going?" she demanded. "To check the goats. The storm's easing. It's the middle of the night. You're a coward," she whispered. He paused at the door, his hand on the latch. "No," he said, without turning. "I'm just a man who knows his own strength. Go to sleep." He left. The cabin was empty, and suddenly colder than before. He was gone for hours. The storm had indeed broken, and the silence of the snow-filled night was absolute. Clara could not sleep. She walked the cabin. She touched his things. The heavy axe by the door, the tin coffee pot, the few books on a shelf, their spines cracked, the Bible, and a book on animal husbandry. In the small crate he used as a side table, tucked beneath a stack of cured pelts, she found it. It was a small, leather-bound journal, the cover worn smooth. She knew she should not. It was his. It was private, but he was private. He was a locked door, and she needed to know what was inside. She opened it. It was not a ledger. It was not a tally of his traps or his sins. The first page was a sketch, done in charcoal, of a hawk. It was incredibly detailed, every feather captured, the eyes sharp and wild. She turned the page. A pine cone, the exact shape of the mountain peak she could see from the cabin window. A drawing of one of his goats, its expression almost comical. And in between the drawings, there were words, not poems, not quite, just thoughts. Wind is high. Snow will be deep before morning. The old pine split. Saw a wolf track. Big male. He's hungry too. The silence is a good neighbor. It asks for nothing. She flipped through the pages. The drawings were delicate, the handwriting careful. This was not the work of a brute. This was the work of a man who looked and saw. A man who was quiet not because he was empty, but because he was full. She was sitting on the floor by the fire, the book open in her lap, when the door opened. Wes stamped the snow from his boots. He saw her. He saw the book. Clara froze. She expected him to yell, to snatch it away, to finally show the violence she had been baiting. He just looked at her, then at the book, and a deep, weary sadness crossed his face. He said nothing. He walked to the fire, took the pot, and began to make coffee. Clara closed the journal. She held it out to him. Her hand was shaking. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He took the book and placed it carefully back in the crate. He did not look at her. "The snow is 10 feet deep in the pass," he said, his voice flat. "Nothing is getting in or out for a long time." He poured 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to her. Their fingers brushed. She flinched. He pulled his hand back as if he had been burned. They sat in the silence, on opposite sides of the fire, drinking coffee as the sun began to light the white, frozen world outside. The snow had trapped them. The truce, uneasy and fragile, had begun. The cabin became their world. A small, square box of logs buried in a sea of white. The snow did not stop. It piled in drifts that buried the windows, and Wes had to dig a trench to the door each morning, his shovel scraping in the blue. Pre-dawn light. Survival was not a thought. It was a rhythm, a series of chores that kept the cold and the silence at bay. Wes knew that idleness was a poison. It let the past in. He would not let her sit on the cot and fade. He was going to teach her how to live here. "You'll need to learn the wood," he said one morning, his voice flat. He held out a pair of his own wool mittens, worn thin at the palms. "I can't be hauling for 2. She looked at the mittens, then at his face. She took them. He led her to the wood pile, a sheltered stack under a lean-to. He handed her the small axe, the one he used for kindling. "Not like that," he said, as she gripped it like a club. He repositioned her hands, his own calloused, rough hand covering hers for a second. His skin was hot, even in the cold. She pulled away. He showed her how to split the smaller logs. He was patient, his motions economical. "Let the weight do the work," he said. Clara tried. The axe was heavy, and her arms, thin and unused to labor, trembled. She brought the axe down, and it glanced off the wood, biting into the chopping block. She tried again. The wood skittered away, untouched. Tears of frustration stung her eyes. She hated this. She hated him for making her do it. She hated herself for being so weak. "I can't," she said, her voice small, tight. "Yes, you can," Wes replied, not unkindly. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the wood. "You just ain't done it yet. Try again." She hated that he did not pity her. Every man she had ever known used pity as a doorway. Wes just stood there, a mountain of a man, expecting her to work. She swung the axe, a surge of pure, blind anger fueling the blow. It hit the wood, off-center, but hard. The log split, one half flying into the snow. She stood breathing hard, staring at the white, clean-grained wood. It was the first useful thing she had done in a year. She did not look at him, but she picked up the other half and set it on the block. He taught her how to set the snares. He took her on the snowshoes, a slow, clumsy trek into the silence of the pines. His journal was right. He was a man who saw. He pointed, not with his finger, but with his chin. "There, a rabbit run." He showed her how to find the trail, how to tie the slip knot in the wire, how to anchor it to a young sapling. Her hands, stiff with cold, fumbled with the wire. They trembled. She remembered, for a flash, her hands trembling as she tried to pour whiskey for Rickard without spilling it. He had hit her for spilling it. Wes watched her hands. He saw the way they shook, the small, white scars on her knuckles. He said nothing about it. He just took the wire, formed the loop again, and pressed it back into her palm. "Gently," he said. "It's got to be a whisper, or they'll feel it. They'll know it's a trap." She failed at simple tasks. She burned the bannock. She dropped the water bucket, spilling half their haul, and had to make the trip to the stream with him again. But she never cried where he could see. She would turn her back, her shoulders shaking, and swipe at her face with an angry motion. She refused his pity, and he respected her for it. In return, she began to claim the cabin. It was his space, but she was living in it. She would not live in a man's filth. Not again. While he was outside, she worked. She had no broom, so she made one, tying pine boughs to a stick. She swept the floor until the packed dirt was clean. She scrubbed the table with lye soap and hot water until the wood grain showed, pale and clean. The place smelled of him, of cured leather and gun oil and the faint, musky scent of goat. It was a smell of solitude. She found his mending kit. The needle was thick, the thread coarse. She sat by the fire, the heavy bearskin over her lap, and began to mend the blankets. The stitches were small, neat. She was good with a needle. It was a skill from another life, a life before the gold dust. Wes came in one afternoon, stomping snow from his boots. He stopped. He sniffed the air. The cabin smelled different. It smelled of the pine boughs she had hung from the rafters, and the clean, sharp scent of lye. He looked at the table. He looked at the mended tear in the blanket he had been sleeping in, the one she had fixed with her small, precise stitches. He looked at her. She was sitting by the fire, her head bent, mending one of his shirts. The firelight caught the red in her hair. She looked, for a moment, like a wife. The thought was so sharp, so unwelcome. It made him physically recoil. He turned to the wood stove, his back to her, and began to feed it logs with unnecessary force. "The stovepipe is loose," he said, his voice too rough. "The draft ain't right." The truce held for weeks. The snow kept falling. They lived in the small space, moving around each other like two wary, territorial animals. They spoke of the weather, the traps, the wood. They did not speak of the past or the future. The stove was a problem. It was old, and the pipe that vented through the roof had a bad joint. It leaked smoke, and on windy nights, it sent sparks back into the room. "We have to fix it," Wes said one afternoon, the light already fading. "Another storm is coming. A backdraft will set the roof on fire." It was a two-person job. He needed to get on the roof to secure it from the outside, and she needed to hold the pipe steady from the inside. He climbed up, and she was left in the cabin, her head tilted back, her hands on the hot, black metal. "All right," his voice came, muffled by the roof and the snow. "Hold it. Don't let it turn." She held it, the heat seeping through her mittens. She could hear him shifting above her, the scrape of his boots. Then, a curse, a sound of sliding, a heavy thud as he landed on the roof. "Wes?" she called, panic in her voice. "I'm all right." He grunted. "A patch of ice. Now hold it. I've almost got it." A shower of soot and a single, glowing ember fell from the joint. It landed on her shoulder, on the wool shirt he had given her. She gasped. She smelled the acrid scent of burning wool. She tried to swat it, but she could not let go of the pipe. "Wes," she said, her voice rising. Before she could scream, the door burst open. He must have jumped from the roof. He filled the doorway, his face dark against the white snow. He saw the small, orange flame on her shoulder. He moved faster than she thought a man his size could. 3 long strides, and he was on her. He did not ask. He did not pause. He grabbed the front of the shirt with one hand and tore it, ripping the thick wool from her shoulder, pulling it away from her skin. He threw the smoldering cloth to the floor and stomped it out with his boot. The cabin was silent, save for the howl of the wind outside. Clara stood, frozen. The cold air hit her bare skin. She was exposed, from her neck to her ribs, the torn shirt hanging open. He stood a foot away, his chest heaving, his hand still holding the piece of burnt cloth. His eyes, which had been on the fire, lifted to her skin. He saw them. The bruises he had seen when she was unconscious were faded, yellow and green, but these were new, or rather, not new. They were old, a pattern of them, up her ribs, and above her heart, a small, dark crescent, a bite mark, scarred over, and below that, just visible, the dark, ugly brand of the pick in the letter. She was a map of other men's cruelty. He looked at her face. She was not scared. She was not angry. She was just still. She was waiting for him to hit her, or to grab her. She was waiting for the payment. The silence burned. It was worse than the fire. It was filled with everything he had run from, everything she had endured. Wes looked at the ruined shirt in his hand. He let it drop. He looked at his own hand, the one that had torn the cloth. It was a big, ugly, scarred hand. A hand that had killed a man. He turned, his movement stiff, and walked to his bunk. He picked up a clean shirt, one he had not worn. He walked back to her. He did not look at her face. He just held it out. Clara, her hand shaking, took it. She turned her back to him, pulling the torn cloth around her as she fumbled with the clean one. He did not move. He stood behind her, a silent guardian, until she was covered. "The stove is fixed," he said, and his voice was a raw, aching sound. He grabbed his coat and went back outside, into the storm. That night, the tension was a third person in the room. He sat in his chair, cleaning his rifle, a task he had already done that morning. She sat on the cot, her knees pulled to her chest, wrapped in a blanket. The fire popped. The wind moaned. She could not stand the silence. She had to break it. "Why?" she asked, her voice quiet. He did not look up. "Why what? Why did you turn away?" He stopped polishing the barrel. He set the rag down. "Turn away from what?" "This afternoon. You saw." She did not need to say what. "You saw, and you walked away, just like you did when I found your book." He looked up then. His eyes met hers across the small, fire-lit space. The ice was gone from his gaze. It was just tired. "What did you want me to do? Clara? I don't know," she whispered. "Shout, yell, do something." He was quiet for a long time. He looked at the fire, at the flames licking the wood. "You're afraid, aren't you?" she said, pressing into the quiet. "I thought it was me you were hiding from, but it's not. You're afraid of me, or are you afraid of yourself?" Wes ran a hand over his scarred face. He let out a breath, a long, slow sound of defeat. "Both," he said, his voice barely a rasp. "I'm afraid of both." The admission hung in the air, raw and real. He was afraid of her, of the softness and the pain she brought into his hard, empty life. And he was afraid of himself, of the man he had been, the man who had broken things he had not meant to. The whiskey was for the cold. He kept it in a tin flask, a high-grade, burning liquid that he used for medicine, or for nights when the temperature dropped so low the logs themselves seemed to freeze. Clara had been watching it. One night, a week after the fire, the silence had stretched too thin. She was raw, her nerves scraped. "I want some of that," she said, nodding to the flask on the shelf. Wes looked at her. "It ain't for ladies." "I ain't a lady," she said, her voice hard. "I stopped being a lady when my father sold me for $10 and a mule. Give me the whiskey." He hesitated. Then he stood, took the flask, and handed it to her. He handed her a tin cup. She waved the cup away. She drank from the flask. A long, deep swallow. It burned. A pure, clean fire that hit her stomach and spread through her limbs. It was the first warmth she had felt in a year that was not laced with fear. She drank again. "Go slow," he warned. She laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "Don't you tell me to go slow." The whiskey loosened her. It unwound the tight, cold knot in her belly. It brought back the gold dust, the smell of the perfume, the feel of men's hands. But this time, she was not there. She was here, in a warm cabin, with a man who was afraid of her. The power of that was a new kind of intoxication. She stood. The cabin seemed to sway, just a little. He was watching her, his face in shadow. She saw him, not as a giant, not as a killer, just as a man. A lonely, sad, and decent man. And she was a lonely, sad, and broken woman. She knew one way to thank a man. It was the only coin she had. She walked to him. She stood in front of his chair. He looked up, his eyes wary. "Clara," he said, a warning. She unlaced the front of the wool shirt. "You saved me," she whispered. "You fed me. You didn't hurt me. I'm grateful. I don't want your gratitude," he said, his voice tight. He did not move. "Every man wants something," she said. She let the shirt fall open. She was wearing nothing underneath. The firelight played on her skin, on the bruises, on the brand. "This is all I have. Let me pay my way." She reached for him. He caught her wrists. His grip was steel, but it did not hurt. He held her, his gaze locked on hers. "No," he said. "Why?" she cried, the whiskey and the shame rising in her. "Am I not good enough? Am I too ruined?" "Stop," he commanded, and the word was a plea. He stood, forcing her to step back. He was so big, he was trembling. "I'm too big for you, Clara," he said, his voice raw. "I don't care," she said, trying to press against him. "No," he said, and he put a hand on his own chest, a huge, scarred fist. "Not just here. I'm too big. In the places that hurt." He looked at his own hands. "I break things. Clara, things I don't mean to. I am not the man you should be offering yourself to." He gently, firmly, pulled the shirt closed. He buttoned it, his clumsy fingers fumbling with the small buttons. "Go to sleep," he said. "You're drunk." Shame hit her, cold and hard. He had refused her. He had seen her offer, her last, pitiful piece of currency, and he had named it worthless. She turned, her face burning, and stumbled to the cot. She buried her face in the pillow and did not make a sound. He sat by the fire for hours. He thought she was asleep. She was not. She was lying in the dark, the shame cooling into a hard, cold anger. He had rejected her. He had treated her like a child. He, with his gentle hands and his sad eyes, had shamed her more than Rickard ever had with his fists. Rickard had seen her as a thing to be used. Wes saw her as a thing to be protected. It was the same. Neither of them saw her. She would not be protected. She would not be fragile. She rose from the cot. The fire was low, just glowing embers. The cabin was dark. Wes was still in his chair, his head leaned back, his eyes closed. He was not asleep, she knew. He was waiting. She walked to him, silent on her bare feet. She did not say a word. She did not unlace her shirt. She just did. She hiked up the long wool shirt, climbed onto his lap, and straddled him. He tensed, his entire body going rigid, his eyes snapped open. She leaned in, her hair falling around her face. She put her hands on his shoulders. She was in control. She was terrified. "Try me anyway," she whispered. His hands came up. They were huge. They hovered at her waist. He could snap her in two. He could throw her across the room. He could take what she offered. His breath was hot on her face. She saw the war in his eyes, the desire, hot and sharp, fighting the control. He put his hands on her waist. She braced herself. He lifted her. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, his strength effortless. He lifted her off his lap and set her on her feet, gently, as if she were made of glass. He did not speak. He just looked at her, his eyes dark with a pain she was just beginning to understand. He had not taken, but he had not pushed her away. The heat of that moment, the feel of his hands on her waist, lingered for nights. It was a new silence, a new tension. It was not the peace of strangers. It was the silence of a man and a woman who both knew what was possible. The next morning, Wes went out. He was gone for a long time. He came back dragging 2 long, sturdy pine saplings. He began to work, just outside the door, in the snow. He was building a second cot. Clara watched him through the open door. He was lashing the wood together with rawhide. He was building a wall. He was putting her on the other side of the room. He was making her a stranger again. She felt the axe in her hand. She did not remember picking it up. She walked out the door. He was testing the frame, pulling on it to see if it was sturdy. "It's good work," she said. He looked up, surprised. "It'll keep you comfortable." "I'm sure it will," she said. She lifted the axe. "Clara, what?" She swung it. She swung it with all the strength she had, all the anger from the saloon, all the shame from the night before. The blade bit deep into the pine. She raised it and swung again, and again. The rawhide snapped. The wood splintered. She destroyed the cot. She stood, breathing hard, the axe heavy in her hands. He was staring at her, his face a mask of disbelief. "I won't," she said, her voice shaking but strong. I won't sleep across the room like a stranger. She dropped the axe. She turned, walked back into the cabin, and sat by the fire, her back to him. She waited for him to yell, to hit her. She waited for him to leave. He came in, a long time later. He did not speak. He just picked up the broken pieces of the cot and fed them, one by one, into the fire. The wall was gone. The distance, the emotional space he had tried to build, was broken. They began to touch. It was not lust, it was comfort. He would hand her a cup of coffee, and his fingers would brush hers. Neither of them flinched. She was carding wool from the goats, and a burr was caught in her hair. She cursed, trying to pull it free. "Hold still," he said. He came up behind her, and his big, clumsy-looking fingers worked the burr free, his touch surprisingly gentle. She was patching his coat. He sat beside her, watching her small, quick stitches. He reached out, slowly, and touched her cheek, just a brush of his thumb. She leaned into the touch, just for a second. They were two broken things, mending each other. The hope was a fragile thing, a small, green shoot in the middle of a hard winter. One morning, Wes went out to check the traps. He went further than usual. Up the ridge, the snow was hard-packed, melted by the weak sun and refrozen in the night. It held tracks perfectly. He saw them. They were not his. They were not deer. It was a horse, a single rider, shod, meaning it was a town horse, not a wild one. The rider had sat on the ridge for a long time, looking down at the cabin. He had been close enough to see the smoke from the chimney. Wes's blood went cold. The rider had not come down. He had circled and ridden away, back toward the pass. The world had found them. Wes crouched, erasing the tracks with his gloved hand. But he knew someone was looking. He turned back to the cabin, his long strides heavy, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. The peace was over. The change in him was as sudden and as cold as a shadow passing over the sun. The man who had gently brushed her cheek was gone, replaced by the one who had first found her. Wes was tense, his body a coiled spring. He no longer mended things by the fire. He watched. He spent hours on the ridge, his broad form a dark statue against the blinding white. He returned to the cabin not with game, but with a silence that was heavier and more frightening than the one he had kept before. Clara saw him cleaning his rifle. He had cleaned it 3 days prior. She saw him test the edge of his skinning knife, again and again. The cabin, which had begun to feel like a shelter, now felt like a trap, and he was the animal pacing it. The worst was at night. He had given her the cot, resuming his place in the chair by the fire, a concession to her presence that she had come to accept. She woke in the deep cold of the night. The fire burned down to embers. He was asleep, or pretending to be. His head was leaned back against the wall, but his hand, the one that had drawn hawks and held her steady, was not at rest. It was gripping the hilt of his big knife, the one he kept at his belt. His thumb was resting on the quillon. Ready. He was not resting. He was waiting. She could not bear it. The truce had been broken. Not by them, but by the tracks in the snow. "Who are you waiting for?" she asked the next morning. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the sound of him splitting kindling inside the door. He stopped, the axe held in midair. He did not look at her. "The snow is deep, but it'll melt." "That's not an answer," she said, her hands balling into fists. "You sleep with a knife in your hand. You watch the woods like they're about to move. Am I your prisoner? Wes, did you just save me to be a sentry?" He turned then. His face was grim. The scar, a pale, angry line. "You think this is about you?" "I don't know what to think. You don't talk. You just glower." "You're scaring me." His face softened. Just a fraction. The anger drained out of him, leaving that deep, familiar weariness. He dropped the axe and ran a hand through his hair. "I found tracks," he said, his voice a low rumble. "A single rider, up on the ridge. He watched the cabin. He's gone, but he'll be back. He'll have seen the smoke." "A hunter?" she asked, though she knew it was a lie. No, Wes said. Not a hunter. I've been hidden a long time. It seems my time ran out. Someone from my past, from before these mountains. They might have found me. He was a man hiding from the law, a man who had killed. She had known it, in her bones, and now, his past was coming, and she was trapped in the path of it. She should have been afraid of him, but in that moment, seeing the deep, hunted look in his eyes, she only felt a strange, aching kinship. He was branded, just like her. His brand was just invisible. She sat on the edge of the cot, her hands in her lap. So you're a man on the run. That's what I am, he said, his voice flat. He turned back to the kindling, his shoulders set, closing the conversation. My name isn't Clara, she said, her voice soft. He stopped. He turned back to her, slowly. Clara was the name they gave me at the gold dust, she whispered, twisting the thread on the blanket. It sounded clean, like a girl on a stage. My real name is June Abernathy. He said nothing. He just watched her, his gaze steady, inviting the rest of the truth. Rickard, he called me Clara, but I was June when it happened. She took a deep, shuddering breath. I was 16. My father, he wasn't a bad man. Not really, just weak. He loved the cards. He owed money to a man from the freight office. A lot of money. More than our small farm in Missouri was worth. She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Meeting his. He sold me, she said. The words were bare, hard, ugly. He didn't call it that. He called it an arrangement. I was to be a companion to the man's wife, to help her in the house until the debt was paid. But there was no wife. There was just a freight office, and then a wagon train, and then a string of camps, and then the gold dust. She finally let the tears fall. I hated him for it, but I hate myself more, because I was good at it. I learned how to smile. I learned how to pour the drinks. I learned how to let them touch me and not scream. I learned how to survive, and Clara was the one who did it. Not June. June died back in Missouri. Wes crossed the small cabin in 2 strides. He did not sit. He crouched in front of her, bringing his massive frame down to her level. He did not touch her. He just waited. I ran, she finished, her voice thick. And I ended up here. And now your past is coming. And my past is always one step behind me. He was quiet for a long time, his eyes shadowed. He was looking at her brand, the one he had seen that day by the stove. He understood. June, he said. It was the first time he had said the name. It sounded strange and solid. I ain't seen no girl named Clara in this cabin, and I ain't seen no ghosts. Neither. I just see you. He reached out, not to her face, but to her hands. He gently uncurled her fists. The past, it finds you. No matter how deep you hide, only thing to do is to stand and face it when it comes. He stood. But we can hope it takes its time. The world seemed to agree. That night, the wind returned. It did not howl this time. It shrieked. It was a high, thin sound that vibrated in the logs of the cabin. The temperature dropped so fast the moisture on the single window pane froze into a solid, opaque sheet of ice. Wes had been watching the sky. It's a big one, he said, his voice grim. Get the water buckets full. Fill everything. For the next 5 days, the world ceased to exist. The blizzard was not just snow. It was a white, roaring emptiness. It buried the cabin, piling drifts up past the eaves. The sun vanished. Day and night blurred into a long, gray twilight, marked only by the flickering of the fire and the scream of the wind. They were locked in. The cabin, once a shelter, became a tomb, a ship on a white, frozen sea. There were no chores. There was nowhere to walk. There was no checking traps, no cutting wood. There was only the fire and each other. The tension that had been about the rider on the ridge slowly transformed. The secrets they had shared, his past and her name, hung in the air, thick and heavy. They had shared their souls. There was nothing left but their bodies. They sat by the fire, mending things that did not need mending. She restitched the seams on his mittens. He carved a new handle for the coffee pot. They talked, not of their pasts, but of small things, the way the snow drifted, the habits of the goats, who were safe and warm in their small, connected lean-to. On the third day, the silence had become so loud it was unbearable. "Tell me about the hawks," June said, her voice quiet. "What?" "In your book. You draw them. Why?" He looked into the fire. "They're free," he said. "They ain't tied to the ground. They see everything. And they ain't afraid. They just are. They're honest." On the fourth day, he was sketching in his journal. She sat beside him, close enough to feel the heat from his body. She watched his big, scarred hand move, the charcoal whispering over the page. He was not drawing a hawk. He was drawing her hand, the one mending the blanket. He stopped, aware of her gaze. "You see things," she whispered. "You don't just look. You see." He closed the book. The air between them was electric. It was no longer about fear or shame. It was about need. A deep, agonizing need to be seen, to be held, to be touched by one person, in kindness, after being touched by so many, in cruelty. On the fifth night, the wind finally died. The silence was absolute. Shocking. The fire was low. The cabin was lit only by the flickering, warm light of the embers. Wes sat in his chair. June sat on the floor, her back against the cot. "It stopped," she said. "Yes," he said. Neither of them moved. The moment was stretched thin. She stood. She walked to him. He watched her, his eyes dark, his body tensed. "June," he said, his voice a warning. "A plea." "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say my name like it's a sin." She knelt in front of him, just as he had knelt in front of her. She put her hands on his knees. They were solid as rock. "You're afraid," she said. "I told you," he rasped, his voice thick. I break things. I'm too big. I'll hurt you." "You already hurt me," she said. "When you look away, when you treat me like glass, I'm not glass. Wes, I'm like old iron. I've been through the fire. I'm still here." She leaned in. He did not move. He was a mountain, braced for a tremor. She kissed him. His lips were chapped, hard. He did not respond. He was frozen. "Wes," she whispered against his mouth. "Please, I'm not asking you to save me. I'm asking you to see me, just for tonight. See me?" He made a sound, a low groan of defeat, of agony, of need. His hands came up, those big, calloused, dangerous hands. They did not grab her. They cupped her face, his thumbs brushing the tears from her cheeks. He kissed her back. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a kiss of starvation. It was a kiss of two people who had been lost in the cold for a long, long time. It tasted of wood smoke and coffee and the salt of her tears. He pulled back, his breath ragged. "We shouldn't," he said. "We must," she replied. He stood, lifting her with him as if she weighed nothing. He carried her the 2 steps to the cot and laid her on the bearskin. He loomed over her, a shadow blocking the firelight. "I will not be a brute," he said, his voice shaking. "I will not be what they were." "I know," she said. The desire was a fire, but it was layered with hesitation. He undressed her slowly, his hands shaking. He looked at her, at all of it. The brand, the bruises, the small, white scars. He did not look at them with hunger, but with a terrible, aching reverence. He kissed her shoulder, his lips tracing the scar from the bite mark. He was not just touching her. He was healing her. He pulled back, his own defenses still in place. "You warned me," she said, her voice gaining strength. "That you were too big." She sat up, pushing the hair from her face. She was not a victim. She was not a purchase. She was June. She pushed him, gently, onto the cot. He went, surprised by her strength. He lay back, his massive form filling the small space. He was vulnerable, exposed. She climbed on top of him, straddling his waist, just as she had done in anger all those weeks ago. But this was not anger. This was a choice. "You said you were too big," she whispered, looking down at him. "But you were wrong. You're not too big. You're just enough." He closed his eyes. His hands rested on her hips. Not to control, but to anchor. It was not a coupling of dominance. It was a reclamation. For her, it was the first time she had chosen. The first time it was not about survival, but about desire. For him, it was a terror and a miracle. He was a man who had only ever used his strength to break, and now he was being asked to use it to hold. It was raw, it was desperate, it was slow, and layered with pain, and it was the most healing thing that had ever happened to either of them. It was a promise made in the dark, in the center of a storm, a vow of trust and fire. Afterward, the silence that returned was different. It was sated, it was peaceful. Until he broke it. Wes moved from under her, his motions sudden, jerky. He stood, pulling on his pants, his back to her. He was shaking. "We shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice flat and dead. June felt the cold hit her skin. She pulled the bearskin up, covering herself. The shame was a sudden, icy bath. He regretted it. He had taken what he wanted, and now she was a mistake. She was Clara again. "Why?" she asked, her voice small, stiff. "Was I not what you wanted?" He turned, and his face was a mask of such anguish that it stopped her breath. "What I wanted," he said, his voice rising. "What I wanted." "Do you see me as a mistake?" she cried, sitting up, the bearskin clutched to her chest. "Is that it? Am I just another whore in a long line of regrets?" "No!" he roared, and he slammed his fist against the log wall. The cabin shuddered. He stood there, breathing hard, looking at his bruised knuckles. "No," he said, his voice breaking. He turned to her, and his eyes were raw. "You're not a mistake." He walked to her. He knelt by the cot. He took her hand. "I see you as a forever, June," he whispered. "A forever I don't deserve. Don't you see? I'm a dead man. I'm hiding from a rope, and I just tied you to me. That's what we did. I just tied you to a man who's going to hang. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have loved you." He hadn't said the word, but he had. She looked at his face, at the man who saw himself as a monster, as a broken thing. She saw his fear, and it was not for himself. It was for her. She touched his scarred cheek. "Wes," she said, "we're both broken. Maybe the broken pieces fit together." A few days later, the storm had passed. The world was bright, clean, and silent. He was out, finally checking the traps, giving them both space. June found a smooth, pale strip of birch bark in the kindling box. She took his knife, the one he left on the table. She sat by the fire, the sunlight streaming in. She was not an artist, like him, but her hands were steady. She carved a W, and next to it, a J. She tied it with a small strip of rawhide. That night, they shared the cot. It was a tight fit, but neither of them minded. When he was asleep, his breathing deep and slow, she slipped the small bark carving under the flat, worn pillow. It was a secret, a vow. The spring was coming. The snow began to melt, and with the melt came the world. He heard it first, a horse struggling in the deep, wet snow of the pass. It was not the crisp sound of a winter rider. It was the suck and pull of a heavy thaw. Wes was on his feet, his rifle in his hand, before she even sat up. "What is it?" "Stay down," he said. He moved to the window, scraping a small patch of ice away. He saw him, a rider, on a fine black horse. He wore a dark wool coat, a town hat. He was not alone. Two other men, rougher, on trail horses, followed behind him. "Who is it?" June asked, pulling the blanket around her. "Is it the law?" "I don't think so." Wes said, his voice hard. They ride like bounty men. Or worse. He watched the man in the lead. He sat his horse with an arrogance, looking down at the small cabin as if he were deciding whether to buy it or burn it. June moved up beside Wes, peering through the small opening in the window. She saw the man's face as he turned, the perfectly trimmed beard, the cold eyes, the small, silver flask he pulled from his coat. Her breath left her. The blood drained from her face. "June," Wes said, not looking away from the men. "I know him," she whispered, her voice dead. I know him." The man looked down, spat on the snow, and spurred his horse forward. "That's Rickard," she said, and the name was a curse. "He's the one who owned me." Wes looked at her, at the pure animal terror in her eyes. He looked back at the riders. They were his past. They were her past. It was all the same. He cocked the rifle. The click was the loudest sound in the world. "Wes," she said, grabbing his arm. The man he was becoming scared her. The cold, efficient killer. "They ain't taking you," he said. "Wes, no," she begged, her fingers digging into his sleeve. "Don't kill. Please, not for me. I've seen what killing does. It ruins you. It'll make you him. Don't lose yourself just to save me." He looked down at her hand on his arm. He looked at the men, now only 100 yards from the door. "Go to the back," he said, his voice calm, cold. "Bar the door, and no matter what you hear, don't come out." Wes did not tell her to hide a second time. He simply looked at her, one long, hard look that said everything. "Stay alive?" She nodded, her face pale, and moved to the back of the cabin, barring the heavy rear door as he had taught her. She was not hiding. She was waiting. She put her hand on the cold iron shovel leaning against the hearth, where the embers from the breakfast fire still glowed. Wes stepped out onto the small, snow-packed porch. He did not raise the rifle, but held it across his waist. The muzzle pointed at the gray, heavy sky. He filled the doorway, a solid, unmoving shadow against the light of the cabin behind him. The 3 riders stopped 20 yards out. The snow sucked at their horses' hooves. The man in the center, Rickard, was just as June had described. He wore a fine wool coat and a hat that had never seen a cattle drive. He looked clean, and that made him look more dangerous than the 2 rough men who flanked him. They were bounty hunters, their eyes cold and flat, their hands resting on the guns at their hips. "That's far enough," Wes's voice boomed, flat and heavy, rolling across the snow. Rickard smiled. It was a thin, unpleasant expression, like a crack in a frozen pond. He took in Wes's size, the scarred face, the rifle. He looked amused. "A big one," Rickard called out, his voice a town voice, smooth and clear. "I'm looking for a piece of property, a girl, slender, red hair, answers to the name of Clara. You seen her?" "There's no one here by that name." Wes said, "This is my land. Turn your horses and ride back the way you came." Rickard's smile widened. "Clara!" he shouted, his voice suddenly sharp, cutting. "I know you're in there, you little whore. I can smell the cheap perfume from here. Come on out. You've had your fun. Your debt is still on my books." Inside, June flinched, her hand tightening on the shovel. "She's a runaway debt slave," Rickard said to Wes, pulling a piece of folded paper from his coat pocket. He held it up. "I have the writ, signed and sealed by the magistrate at the Gold Dust. She belongs to me, legally." "That paper's a lie, and you know it," Wes said, his voice dropping. "It's a forged document," June whispered from inside, her voice a breath of fog on the window she was peering through. Rickard laughed. "It's a piece of paper, the only thing lawmen in this territory care about. Now, send her out, or my friends here will have to come in and get her. And they're not gentle. She's not property," Wes said. The scar on his face seemed to darken. "And she's not coming out?" "No?" Rickard's eyes narrowed. He looked Wes up and down, a look of pure contempt. "So that's how it is. She found herself a new owner, a bigger one. Tell me, friend, How is she? Is she still good at that little trick with her? Ah, but you'd know. He leaned forward in his saddle. She's a used woman, Cowboy, ridden hard and put away wet. There isn't a man at the Gold Dust who hasn't had a taste. Did you really think you were the first, or even the 50th? She's just a whore who ran. Wes's knuckles, wrapped around the rifle, turned white. He could feel the blood pounding in his temples, the hot, familiar rage that he had kept buried for 8 years. He heard June's small, choked cry from inside. "You have," Wes said, his voice dangerously quiet. 3 seconds to turn around. 1. He was not going to shoot. June had asked him not to kill. 2. He lowered the rifle and leaned it, very deliberately, against the cabin wall beside the door. Rickard saw the motion and his smile became a sneer. "A fist fight? You're a fool." He nodded to the man on his right. "Go get her." The bounty hunter, a broad man with a heavy, greasy coat, swung down from his horse. He unhooked the whip from his saddle and let it uncurl in the snow. "This'll be quick," the man grunted, and started for the porch. Wes met him in the snow. He did not run. He just took 2 long strides. The man swung the whip, aiming to cut Wes's face. Wes didn't even flinch. He caught the leather mid-air, his big hand wrapping around it. He yanked. The bounty hunter, surprised by the sudden, raw strength, was pulled forward, off balance. Wes did not let go. He kept pulling, hand over hand, until the man was right in front of him. "She's not yours," Wes said. He hit the man. It was not a flurry of blows. It was a single, brutal punch from his right fist. A fist as big and as hard as a winter-frozen ham. It connected with the man's jaw with a sound like a wet log splitting. The man's head snapped back. He did not fall. He was just out. He collapsed into the snow, a heap of wet coat and unconsciousness. The second bounty hunter, still on his horse, cursed and fumbled for his pistol. Rickard was faster. He had not been smiling. He had been waiting. He was not a fighter. He was a killer. He pulled a small, silver-plated revolver from his coat. "Wes!" June screamed. She had unbarred the door. Rickard turned, surprised by her voice. He saw her in the doorway. "There you are, you bitch!" he snarled, and he aimed the pistol. Not at Wes, but at her. Wes roared. He lunged for Rickard, who was still on his horse, but he was too far. June did not hesitate. She did not hide. She ran from the cabin, her hand still gripping the iron shovel. It was full of the night's embers, red and glowing, with a scream of pure, undiluted rage. She threw the contents of the shovel with all her strength. Hot ash, embers, and burning bits of wood flew through the air. Rickard cried out, a high-pitched, ugly sound, as the fire hit his face and his horse. The horse screamed, rearing in panic. Dumping Rickard backward into the deep snowdrift by the porch, the revolver went flying. The second bounty hunter, seeing his boss down and his partner unconscious, wheeled his horse around. "This ain't worth the pay," he yelled, and he spurred his horse, vanishing back down the trail they had made. But Wes was not looking at him. His eyes were on Rickard. Rickard was clawing at his face, rolling in the snow, his fine coat smoking. The smell of burned hair and wool filled the cold air. The rage in Wes was no longer a fire. It was a glacier, cold, massive, and unstoppable. He had wanted to kill the foreman 8 years ago, but this was different. He needed to kill Rickard. He needed to erase the man who had put that brand on her, who had put that fear in her eyes. He strode to Rickard. He grabbed the front of his smoking coat and hauled him to his feet. Rickard was whimpering, his face a mess of red welts and black ash. Wes hit him. Once, twice. He drove him back against the cabin wall, the logs groaning from the impact. He pinned him there. His left forearm crushed against Rickard's throat. His right hand, his killing hand, was pulled back. He was going to end this. "Wes!" June's voice. He didn't look. He just stared at the man he was about to break. "Wes, please!" she cried. And this time, she grabbed his arm. the one that was pulled back. "Please, don't lose yourself. Not to save me. Don't become him." He froze. His arm was shaking. His whole body was trembling with the violence he had held back for so long. He was on the edge, the very precipice, of becoming the monster he had always feared he was. "Don't," she whispered again, her tears hot on his cold sleeve. "He's not worth you." He let out a breath. It was a ragged tearing sound, like a soul being ripped in two. He looked down at the pathetic, whimpering man pinned beneath him. He looked at June, her face white with terror, but her eyes pleading, not for Rickard, but for him. He let go. Rickard collapsed to the ground, sobbing and coughing. Wes stepped back, his chest heaving. The violence was still there, a living thing, looking for an outlet. He wanted to kill. He needed to finish it. Instead, he looked at June. "Get my book," he said, his voice a low growl. "And the charcoal." She stared, uncomprehending. "What?" "Get it now." She ran inside. She came back with his journal and a piece of charcoal. Wes tore a blank page from the back. He grabbed Rickard by his burned hair and dragged him, face down, through the snow, to the chopping block. He slammed the man's head down on the wood. "You're going to sign a confession," Wes growled. I can't see." Rickard wept. "You don't need to see. You just need to sign." Wes grabbed the man's hand. "Or I'll take this one, and you'll never hold a pen, or a gun, or a woman again." He let the man go. Rickard, his body shaking, fumbled for the charcoal. "Write what I say," Wes commanded. "My name is Rickard. I held a woman named June Abernathy. Against her will, I branded her. I abused her. I forged documents, claiming she was my property. She is a free woman." Rickard's hand shook so badly the words were barely a crawl. "Sign it." Rickard signed. Wes took the paper. He folded it. He looked at Rickard, then at the unconscious bounty hunter, who was beginning to groan. "Get him on his horse," Wes said to Rickard. It was a pathetic sight. Rickard, his face blistered, his hands shaking, trying to haul the heavy man onto the saddle. It took him 10 minutes. "Now," Wes said, picking up the revolver from the snow. He emptied the chambers, then threw the gun into the deep drift. He did the same with the bounty hunter's pistol. "You ride out, you don't come back. If I ever see your face in this territory again, I will not let her stop me." He walked to Rickard's fine black horse. "And you're walking. Your horse stays." Rickard stared at him, his one good eye wide with disbelief. "It's a 2-day walk to the pass," Rickard whispered. "I'll freeze." "Then you'd better start walking," Wes said. He slapped the horse on the rump, sending it toward his own small lean-to. Rickard, his face a mask of humiliation, soot and terror, began to limp down the trail, dragging his unconscious partner, who was slumped over the saddle. Wes watched them until they were a small, dark speck in the vast, white world. He stood there for a long time, the cold seeping into his bones. He heard the cabin door close, very softly. The silence that fell was worse than the blizzard. Wes did not go back inside. He couldn't. He walked to the woods, to the ridge. He sat on a log, the same one where he had seen the tracks. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. He had not killed. He had not broken his promise to her. But he had wanted to. He had felt the joy of it, the hot, clean rightness of his fist connecting with the bounty hunter's jaw. He had felt the power as he pinned Rickard to the wall. He had been seconds, a single breath, from crushing the man's throat. June had stopped him. But what would happen next time? He had run from the world for 8 years, hiding from the violence in his own soul. And in 5 minutes, this woman, this June, had brought it all boiling back to the surface. He had thought he was a good man, hiding. He was wrong. He was a monster, in waiting. He sat there for hours as the sun began to sink, painting the snow in shades of cold purple and pink. He could not go back to the cabin. He could not face her. He could not look at her without seeing what he had almost done in her name. He was a poison. Everything he touched, he broke. Inside the cabin, June was not crying. She was cold. She had seen his face. When he had Rickard pinned, that had not been Wes. That had been a stranger, a man with cold, dead eyes, a man she did not know. She had pulled him back, but she knew, with a certainty that settled in her stomach like a stone, that he had crossed a line. He had not killed, but he had tasted it. And she had been the one to serve the meal. She had brought this to him. Her past, her shame, herself. She was the reminder of the darkness. She was the one who had unearthed the killer he had tried to bury. He had been safe, in his silence, until he found her. She looked around the small, warm cabin, the mended blankets, the clean table, his journal, sitting on the shelf. This was his home, his sanctuary, and she had invaded it and painted it with blood and ash. He would never forgive her. He would never be able to look at her, a branded, used woman, without remembering the violence she had brought to his door. She had to leave. She had no plan. She had no destination, but she could not stay. If she stayed, she would destroy him. She would be the constant, living proof of his failure to remain peaceful. Quietly, she began to pack. It was a pathetic pile. She had nothing. The tattered saloon dress he had cut from her was long gone, burned. She had only the wool shirt she wore, and the other one he had given her. She put on her mended boots, the ones he had repaired for her. She put a piece of dried goat meat and a small wedge of bannock in a cloth. She looked at the cot, the shared space, the bare skin. She reached under the pillow. The small birch bark carving was gone. Her heart stopped. He had found it. He must have thrown it in the fire. A fresh, sharp pain, worse than Rickard's fists, cut through her. He had already rejected her. She put her hand on the door latch. She looked at the cabin, her home, the only one she had ever known. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the empty, fire-lit room. She slipped out the door. The cold was a shock. She pulled her thin coat tight and began to walk, not toward the pass, but just away, toward the woods. Wes felt her leave. He did not see it, but he felt the cabin door open and close. A sudden, terrible emptiness slammed into him. He stood, he ran. He crashed through the snow, his long legs eating the distance, panic rising in his throat. He saw her, a small, dark figure, just reaching the shadow of the pine trees. "June!" he roared. She stopped. She turned. Her face was a pale white oval in the dusk. He was breathless when he reached her, his lungs burning. He just stood there, his shadow falling over her, panting. "Don't!" he said. It was all he could manage. "Don't go! I have to," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't you see? I'm the darkness. I brought this. I remind you of what you are." "What I am," he said, and his voice was raw. "You think that's what you are?" He fumbled in his pocket. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely get it out. He held it out to her, on his open, calloused palm, the small, birch bark carving, the W and the J. I found this," he said, his voice thick. I was looking for a clean shirt. It was under the pillow." He closed his fist around it. This is the only thing that's been real for 8 years." He looked at her, and his eyes, the eyes she had thought were dead, were filled with a desperate, terrifying plea. "If you leave," he said, his voice cracking, "I go back to silence, not the good kind, the empty kind, the kind that I was in before you. I can't survive that again. Don't leave me. Don't." She looked at the giant of a man, trembling in the snow, holding her small, silly carving as if it were an anchor. She fell against him. She didn't mean to. Her legs just gave out. She wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face in his cold coat. He smelled of pine and wood smoke and a faint, coppery scent of blood. He held her, his arms wrapping around her, crushing her to him. He was shaking. She was shaking. They held each other in the snow, two broken, trembling things, alone in the vast, empty mountains. "Then say it," she demanded, her voice muffled against his chest. "I'm tired of being property. I'm tired of being a mistake. I'm tired of being a reminder. If I'm staying, I need to be yours." He pulled back, just enough to look at her. He put his big, rough hands on her face, tilting it up to his. "You're mine," he whispered, and the words were a vow, a prayer, a brand of his own. Not like he meant, not property. He touched the brand on her shoulder, through the coat. "You're mine, not just for now, for always." The snow did not melt so much as it surrendered. It pulled back from the cabin, slowly, revealing a world of mud, matted grass, and the sharp, clean smell of thawing earth. The silence of the deep winter was broken by the sound of water, dripping from the eaves, and the rush of the nearby stream, now swollen and angry with melt. For Wes and June, it was a resurrection. They had survived the cold, they had survived the fight, and now they had survived the silence that followed. Their vow in the snow, for always, was a fragile, untested thing. The world was coming back, and with it, all the reasons they should not be together. Worry still hung heavy in the cabin, thick as the morning fog in the valley. Wes still watched the pass, though he knew Rickard would not be back. The worry was deeper now. It was not about a single man, but about all the others. The law he had fled 8 years ago, the society that had branded her. They worked. Work was the only answer. They could not stay hidden in the high country forever. A life was not just survival. "The lean-to won't stand another winter," Wes said one morning, surveying the structure where the goats had huddled. The weight of the snow had cracked one of the main beams. They rebuilt it. June was not clumsy with the tools anymore. Her hands, though still scarred, were steady. She learned to notch the logs, to mix the mud and straw for chinking. He taught her, his voice low and patient, and she learned, her focus fierce. They worked as a team, moving around each other in a rhythm, a silent dance of shared purpose. He would lift, and she would be there, ready to brace. She found a patch of land, south-facing, where the snow melted first. "We can plant here," she said, crumbling the dark, rich soil in her hands. "Corn, beans, potatoes. We can make this a home." He looked at her, her face smudged with dirt, her hair tied back, the sun lighting the red in it. She was not the gaunt, terrified creature he had pulled from under the wagon. She was strong, she was planting roots, but they needed seeds. They needed flour, salt, and new axe heads. The traps he had set all winter had yielded a heavy bounty of pelts. "We have to go to town," he said. The words fell between them, heavy as a stone. Town meant people. It meant stairs. It meant the world they had both run from. "Yes," June said, her voice tight. "We need supplies." They loaded the mule and Rickard's fine black horse, now just a pack animal, with the bundles of fox, marten, and beaver pelts. Wes rode his own steady gelding. June rode beside him on the mule. It was the first time they had left the small, hidden valley together. The trade town was called 3 Forks. It was little more than a muddy street, carved between the pines, with a dozen wooden buildings, a general store, a smithy, a saloon that looked meaner than the gold dust, and a tall, thin, white-painted church, its steeple looking judgmental and out of place. As they rode in, the town stopped. A man rolling a barrel onto the boardwalk paused, his mouth open. 2 trappers, lean and hard, stopped their card game by the smithy. Women, coming out of the general store, froze, their hands clutching their baskets. Wes was a mountain of a man, scarred and imposing, leading a horse laden with a winter's worth of wealth. That the town could understand. It was June they were staring at. The men's stares were different from the women's. The men, those who had passed through the mining camps, looked at her with a raw, knowing hunger. They remembered her. She was Clara, the girl from the saloon, the pretty one with the red hair. Their eyes stripped her, wondering how she had ended up with this giant from the mountains, wondering if she was still for sale. The women's stares were worse. They were sharp, cold, and righteous. They saw a woman who had clearly lived in sin, now riding brazenly beside a man who was not her husband. They saw a whore. They pulled their own daughters close, their faces hard with pious resentment. June felt her face burn. She wanted to shrink, to pull her hat low, to vanish. She felt the old, familiar shame rise, tasting like bile in her throat. Wes did not look at them. He looked only at her. He reached across the small space between them and, in front of the entire town, he put his big gloved hand over hers, the one gripping the mule's reins. He did not say a word. He just held her hand, a silent, public declaration. He kept it there as they rode to the general store. He dismounted and tied the horses. He helped her down, his hands on her waist, lifting her. It was a possessive, protective gesture. He did not care who saw. He turned to the gathered pelts. "Stay here," he murmured. "I'll handle the trade." "No," she said, her voice shaking but firm. She pulled her shawl tighter. "We do this together." He looked at her, saw the terror in her eyes, and the steel beneath it. He nodded. They walked into the store. The proprietor, a small man with a nervous twitch, could not stop staring at her. But the pelts were thick, prime. Business was business. As Wes argued prices, a shadow fell across the doorway. A tall man in a black, worn coat stepped inside. He was thin, his face gaunt, his eyes burning with a cold fire. It was the preacher from the white church. He ignored June. He walked directly to Wes, who was examining a bag of seed. "Sir," the preacher said, his voice a low, accusatory hum. Wes turned, slowly. He towered over the man. "You're the man from the mountain," the preacher stated. He had not asked a question. "The one who lives in that hidden cabin?" "I am," Wes said. The preacher's eyes, for the first time, cut to June. He looked at her as if she were a snake. "And is this the woman?" June flinched, stepping back. "This is June," Wes said, his voice flat. He had moved, just slightly, to stand between her and the preacher. "I know what she is," the preacher snapped, his voice rising, drawing the attention of everyone in the store. "The men, they talk, they know her from the camps. She is a whore, and you, sir, are harboring her. You are living in sin, bringing shame to this valley." June's face was white. She felt faint. This was it. This was the brand, made of words, burned onto her in public. Wes did not move. He did not get angry. He just looked at the preacher, his gaze calm, his scarred face unreadable. He was silent for a long, heavy moment. Then he spoke, his voice low, but it filled the small, silent store. "Preacher," he said, and the word was not an insult or a plea, just a name. "I lived in silence for 8 years, hiding from God and from men. I believed in nothing. I was an empty place." He turned his head, just enough to look at June, his eyes full of a tenderness that was more shocking than anger. "She," he said, "is the only salvation I ever believed in." The preacher's mouth opened, then closed. He had no words for this. It was a theology he did not understand. He looked at the giant, quiet man and the broken, trembling woman, and for the first time, he saw not sin, but something else, something fierce and true. He turned, his black coat swirling, and left the store. They finished their purchases in silence. They loaded the mule, their movements stiff. They rode out of Three Forks, the stairs following them. But they were different now. They were confused and a little afraid. They did not speak for miles. June rode ahead, her back straight, her body rigid. Wes kept his distance, giving her the space. When they were deep in the woods, halfway back to the cabin, she stopped. She did not turn. She just slid off the mule, her movements jerky, like a puppet with cut strings. She walked to a fallen log and sat, and she began to weep. It was not a loud sound. It was a silent, racking breakdown. The kind that comes when a person has held on for too long. Her shoulders shook, and she wrapped her arms around her own waist, as if trying to hold herself together. Wes dismounted. He walked to her, but he did not touch her. He just stood, his presence a solid, unmoving thing. "He was right," she whispered, her voice choked. I am what he said. I brought the filth of the camps right to you. You said that, and it's true. I'm just a whore." He was not right. Wes said, "Then why?" she cried, looking up at him, her face wet, her eyes wild with pain. "Why does it have to hurt so much? We survived. We fought. Why do they get to look at me like that? Why does love have to cost so much?" He crouched in front of her, just as he had done in the cabin, bringing his great size down to her level. He put his hands on her shoulders, holding her steady. He looked into her eyes, and he did not look away. "Because," he said, his voice rough and true, "it's the only thing worth the price." He pulled her to her feet and held her, his arms wrapped tight as she cried against his chest, her small, hard sobs muffled by his coat. He just held her, a guardian against the world, until the tears stopped, and she was just breathing. They returned to the cabin as the sun was setting. The valley was quiet. It was their sanctuary, but the day had left a stain. A few days later, they were working on the new rows for the beans, when Wes paused, sniffing the air. "Wood smoke," he said. "Not ours." He walked to the edge of the woods, his hand on his knife. June followed, her heart pounding. Had someone followed them? He stopped. He was looking at their porch. On the rough-hewn plank, there was a pie. It was in a simple tin, covered with a clean, if patched, piece of cheesecloth. Steam was still rising from it. June stared. "Who?" Wes looked up, toward the ridge. He saw a flicker of movement. A woman on a mule, disappearing back toward the pass. He recognized her. She had been one of the women in the store, one who had stared, but her stare, he now realized, had not been judgment. It had been recognition. June walked to the porch. She lifted the cloth. It was an apple pie, a simple, homemade apple pie. She sat on the porch, the pie tin in her lap, and she wept. Not for sorrow, not for shame, but for the small, simple kindness of it. A woman had seen her, not Clara, not whore, but a neighbor. Wes sat beside her. He did not say a word. He just put his hand on her back. The fear began to loosen its grip. The following week, Wes went to town alone. He needed to trade for a new plow bit. June, still raw from the last trip, agreed to stay. He returned late, his face unreadable in the twilight. "What is it?" June asked, her stomach tightening. "I have news," he said. He sat at the table, a place he rarely sat, and motioned for her to do the same. "From the town. Wes, you're scaring me. I ran into the preacher's son," Wes said, "a young man. He sought me out. He was in the gold dust, working for the freight office, when you were there." June's hands went cold. "He saw what Rickard did," Wes said, his voice quiet. "He saw it all. He said he never forgave himself for not stopping it. The confession." June whispered. "Aye," Wes said. "The preacher, he condemned us, but his son, he rode all the way to the camp. He gave that confession, the one I made Rickard sign, to a visiting marshal, anonymously." "What? What happened?" "Rickard was arrested," Wes said. "For fraud, for kidnapping, for assault. The marshal checked his books. The man was a plague. He's in federal chains. June, he's not coming back. He's gone." The threat was gone. Not just driven off, but gone. The past, her past, was finally, truly, over. She did not cry. She just let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for 5 years. The world settled. The spring turned to early summer. The corn came up, green and sharp. The cabin, which had been a refuge, began to feel like a home. but it was small. It was one room, and they were no longer two strangers, but a man and a woman. Wes started sketching again, but he was not drawing hawks. He was drawing her. He sketched her as she knelt by the garden, her hands in the dirt. He sketched her as she kneaded dough, her arms strong, flour on her cheek. He sketched her as she slept, her face soft in the firelight, her hair loose on the pillow. One night, he gave her the journal. This is yours." She opened it. She turned the pages. It was her, but it was not Clara, the performer, the painted doll. It was June. It was her face, strong, her hands, capable, her eyes, laughing. He had not drawn the brand, he had not drawn the scars. He had drawn her as he saw her. "This," she whispered, her fingers tracing the charcoal lines of her own face, "is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me." The next morning, he went out, his axe on his shoulder. He did not go to the woodpile. He went to the stand of thick pines at the edge of the clearing. She heard the sound of the axe, the thud and crack of a large tree falling. "What are we doing?" she asked, coming to stand beside him. "It's too small," he said, gesturing to the cabin. "A man and a woman. They need a room, a shared space." They built it together. He felled the trees and squared the logs. She, with the black horse, dragged them to the cabin. They tore down the north wall, the cabin exposed to the air for 3 days, and they built a new, larger room. It was not just an addition. It was a new start. When it was done, it was a proper home. The old room was the kitchen. The new room was theirs. She hung her pine garlands on the wall, the scent filling the new wood. She put the pie tin, scrubbed and clean, on the mantel. He, in turn, took his rifle from the pegs where it had always hung, and he hung it, not in a place of defense, but in a place of honor, high above their shared door, the weapon that had protected them, now a symbol of the home it had built. The summer settled deep into the valley. The high country sun was a different thing from the weak. Winter light, it was hot and pure, and it seemed to bake the very color of the pines into the air. The corn Wes and June had planted was now shoulder high, a rustling green wall that promised a harvest. Their rebuilt barn was sturdy, the scent of fresh-cut pine and goat mingling in the heat. Their life fell into a new rhythm, one of work and shared silence. But this silence was different. It was not the silence of strangers, nor the tense, waiting silence of the blizzard. It was the easy quiet of two people who knew each other's movements, who could pass a tool or a cup of water without a word, their hands brushing, their purpose one. The world, however, was not entirely done with them. One afternoon, a wagon rattled up the pass. Wes saw it first, his hand moving to the axe he was using, his body tensing. But it was not a threat. It was the preacher, his face stern but the fire gone from his eyes, and beside him, his son, the young man who had delivered the confession. "Mr. Wes," the preacher said, climbing down. He did not call him by a last name. No one knew it. "We, the community, we are opening a new registry." He held out a thick, ledger-style book. "The territory's growing," the preacher explained, his eyes on the new-built room, the neat rows of corn. "The railroad is bringing settlers. The law says if you're to claim the land, to make it yours so no one can take it. It must be registered." Wes looked at June. This was his land, bought with 8 years of silence. It was her land, bought with her own survival. "We have no proper claim," Wes said, his voice flat. He was a man with a past. A noose could be his only claim. "The law," the preacher said, and his gaze was steady, "is about what is written, and what is written can be new. The community. Mr. Wes knows you. They know. Mrs. June." He stumbled on the name, but he used it. "They know you as the folks on the mountain, the woman who brought the pie, Mrs. Gable. She spoke for you. She said this land was earned." The preacher opened the book. "It offers a spot for a family to claim the 160 acres you work, to make it permanent." Wes looked at the blank page. A family. It was a word that did not belong to them. They were outcasts. It costs money, Wes said, his voice rough. No, sir. The preacher's son spoke, his voice clear. The community. We've paid the fee. Consider it a debt settled. He was looking at June, his face holding a deep, abiding respect. What does it need? June asked, her voice quiet. She stepped forward, her hands, stained with garden dirt, clutched at her apron. A name, the preacher said, a family name, to write in the book. Wes had no name he could give. The one he had was a death warrant. He looked at June, at the woman who had shared his name. Wes, as if it were a whole and true thing. He looked at the preacher. The name, he said, his voice solid as the mountain, is Wes. The family is Wes. That's all there is. The preacher looked at the man, at his scarred face and clear eyes. He nodded. The Wes family. He said, he wrote it in the book. Wes and... He paused. And June, she said, her voice clear. June Wes. The preacher wrote it. He closed the book. There is one more thing, he said, and he looked awkward, his hands fumbling with his hat. The registry. It assumes a legal bond. For a man and a woman to claim land as one, the law is particular. They mean marriage, Wes said to June, his voice flat. Yes, the preacher said, his face flushing. It would make the claim ironclad. June looked at Wes. She saw the trap in his eyes. The world was always asking for papers, for proof. They had survived without it. We ain't church folk, Wes said. God ain't only in the church, the preacher said, his voice soft. He's in the way a man and woman stand by each other against the darkness. I have learned that from you. He looked at the ground. If you wished it, I could perform the ceremony. Not for the land, but for the bond. They were married by the stream. The summer sun was hot, and the water rushed over the stones, the same water that had been frozen when they first met. It was a small, quiet thing. The preacher, his son, and Mrs. Gable, the woman who had left the pie, were the only witnesses. June had no white dress. She wore her best wool shirt, the one he had given her, clean and mended. She had woven a string of blue wildflowers into her hair. Wes stood beside her, his sighs seeming to bend the air around him. He wore his own clean shirt. He was freshly shaven, the scar on his face stark and clear in the sunlight. The preacher did not speak of sin. He did not speak of damnation. He spoke of building and of roots and of the strength of two things, broken, that had grown together. They did not have rings. When the time came, Wes just took her hand. He did not put a ring on it. He just held it. You are one, the preacher said, his voice thick. What this world tried to tear apart, let it now be whole. You are man and wife. Mrs. Gable cried, a soft, sniffling sound. Wes did not kiss his bride. He just looked at her, his eyes saying the things his mouth could not. He held her hand, and together, they turned from the stream and walked back to their cabin. That night, the cabin was different. It was theirs, legally. They were theirs, legally. The new room, their shared space, felt larger and more permanent. June lit the fire. The nights were still cool in the high country. Wes sat in the chair he had carved, watching her. She moved with a grace that was all her own, the firelight catching the red of her hair. She finished. She did not go to the cot. She walked to him. She stood in front of him, her shadow dancing on the new log walls. Husband, she said. The word was new, strange, and powerful. He looked up at her. He was a man of few words, and now he had none. She took his hands, his big, scarred, calloused hands, the hands that had killed and built and sketched and healed. She lifted them, and she pressed them, both of them, flat against her chest, over her heart, over the place where the scars lay hidden beneath the wool. She leaned in, her eyes holding his. I know you were afraid," she whispered. "That first time, afraid of the fire in you, afraid of burning me." She pressed his hands harder against her. "There's no one else," she whispered, her voice fierce and full of a love that was as raw as the land. "I'd rather burn with—" He stood, and his hands moved from her heart to her face. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, starving kiss of the blizzard. It was not the shy, hesitant brush of their first touches. It was a kiss of homecoming. It was slow and deep and sure. It held the promise of the registry and the vow of the stream. He lifted her. He carried her the few feet to their bed, the one they had built together. They made love. It was not an escape. It was not a reclamation, or a battle, or a desperate act of survival. It was a settling. It was the slow, sure knowledge of each other's bodies, the landscape of their scars, the rhythm of their breathing. It was filled with soft, hesitant laughter, as he fumbled with a button, as she shivered at his touch. It was filled with an aching tenderness, as his lips traced the line of her jaw, the place where the bruise had been, and found it whole. It was filled with healing tears, as she held him, his great weight a comfort, not a threat, and she felt, for the first time in her entire life, not just wanted, not just safe, but cherished. They slept, not as two people, but as one. The months passed, the corn was harvested, the snows came, but this time, they were not a prison. They were a blanket. The cabin was warm, stocked with food. They had roots. The spring came again, and with it, the garden. The soil was richer now, turned and tended. Wes came in from checking the newborn goats, his hands milky. He did not see June in the cabin. He looked out and saw her. She was in the garden, by the new bean poles. She was on her knees, her hands in the dirt. Her shoulders were shaking. His blood went cold. He ran, his boots slipping in the mud. He thought she was hurt. He reached her, dropping to his knees beside her. "June? What is it? What's wrong?" She looked up. Her face was awash with tears. She was not in pain. She was smiling, a broken, beautiful, watery smile. "June?" he said, his voice full of fear and confusion. She grabbed his hand, his big, milky hand, and pressed it to the wet dirt. I never," she choked out, the tears coming faster. I was just planting the seeds, and I looked up. I saw the cabin. I saw the smoke. I knew you were in the barn." She shook her head, a gesture of disbelief. "I never thought," she whispered. "I never thought I'd live long enough to feel safe." The words hit him. He looked at her, at his wife, crying in the dirt because she was safe. The simple, profound tragedy of it. The simple, profound joy of it. He put his other hand over hers, trapping it in the soil. He looked at her, his eyes clear, and his voice the steadiest she had ever heard it. "Then let's plant roots," he said, "deep enough to never be blown away." The story closes on a warm evening, years later. The cabin is still there, but it is larger. The porch wraps around, and the barn is a proper barn, not a lean-to. The sound of children's laughter, 2 of them, echoes from the stream. Wes and June stand on the porch. He is older now, his hair gray at the temples, the scar on his face a pale, silver memory. He holds her from behind, his arms wrapped around her waist, his body a familiar, solid wall against her back. She is older, too. Her hair is still red, but threaded with white. Her hands, which rest on his, are worn with work, but they are steady. Their fingers are intertwined. They are not looking at each other. They are looking out, together. They are staring at the horizon, at the familiar, purple silhouettes of the Wind River Mountains, watching the sun bleed orange and red into the high, clear sky. The past is still there. It is in the scar on his face and the brand on her shoulder. It is in the silence he still keeps and the way she still flinches, just for a second, when a stranger's voice is too loud, But love has claimed it. Love, raw and imperfect, has taken the broken pieces and built a life. It has turned scars into vows. It has turned silence into comfort. And it has taken two outcasts, a giant and a runaway, and made them, finally, one home. Thank you for listening to this story. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from. So please leave a comment and let us know. If you enjoyed this, be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories just like this one. And we would be grateful if you shared your thoughts, in English, in the comments below. We read every one.